Back on May 24th, I interviewed exclusively here on Outsiders the US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo.
But we will not take any risk to our telecommunications infrastructure, any risk to the national security elements of what we need to do with our Five Eyes partners. We're going to protect and preserve the security of those institutions to the extent they have an adverse impact on our ability to protect telecommunications from our private citizens or security networks for our defense and intelligence communities. We will simply disconnect. We will simply separate. We're going to preserve trusted networks for important information. We hope our friends and partners and allies across the world, especially our Five Eyes partners like Australia, will do the same.
That interview caused an instant hysterical meltdown from the left, with the ABC and The Guardian squealing about the diplomatic storm that we had apparently single-handedly created on this show. When US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo popped up on Australian television over the weekend, it was not to be interviewed by the national broadcaster or indeed one of the main TV channels, blathered The Guardian. Instead, Pompeo chose to appear on a fringe show hosted by a self-styled outsider who loves Donald Trump's tweets almost as much as he loves railing against the left.
You talking to me? Then who the hell else are you talking to? Talking to me?
Yes, I think they were talking about me. Anyway, after sneering and belittling me, The Guardian then claimed it had all gone horribly wrong for the Americans and how the US ambassador had had to clean up the damage that had been caused. The Guardian, by the way, for those who have sensibly never wasted a penny on reading it, is the hardcore left-wing climate change-obsessed rag that was set up by, of all people, Australia's worst-ever Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, which tells you pretty much everything you need to know about why you don't read it. In this case, in keeping with its tried-and-tested business model, The Guardian had completely missed the real story and instead attacked the messenger. The real story was that the Victorian government, led by the communist-sympathising Dan Andrews, was in the process of selling out Australian taxpayer and business interests to a ruthless totalitarian regime, and was doing so with zero regard for the profound security consequences for us and for our friends and allies. Personally, I call that behaviour treasonous. But then again, as The Guardian pointed out, I am a self-styled anti-establishment type. So what would you expect? Fast forward exactly 3 months and hey presto, we got this welcome news from, blow me down, the ABC. Prime Minister Scott Morrison has pledged to tear up state agreements with foreign governments if the Commonwealth dubs them against the national interest. Voila! Congratulations, Scott Morrison. So the government will now pull the plug on dodgy Dan's and his treacherous Belt and Road dealings. Let's chalk that up as yet another win for the outsiders. Up until Mike Pompeo appeared on this show, the Australian media and government had ignored what was staring them in the face. But this isn't the first time Outsiders has led the way in exposing critical foreign policy issues. You'll remember that it was Outsiders who, with the brilliant John Stone and The Spectator Australia, exposed the sinister global compact on migration. And in the ensuing outrage, the government backed down and, again, congratulations, refused to sign it. And before that, it was the Outsiders, with the brilliant David Adler and The Spectator's Andrew Urban and, of course, One Nation leader Pauline Hanson, that exposed your tax dollars were going to Palestinian terrorists. And when Pauline Hanson raised it in Parliament, the government finally cancelled at least $10 million worth of what was pretty dodgy money going to Hamas. We fight these fights on your behalf for conservative common sense. We saw yet another example of a bureaucratic misuse of power only 2 days ago. Dr. Nick Coatsworth is Australia's Deputy Chief Medical Officer. As such, he is a bureaucrat working for the government. As we spoke earlier to Dr. Kulvinder Gill about the sanctity of the doctor-patient relationship and how it works, thanks to the horrors of World War II, in 1948, it was decided that no state or instrument of the state is ethically entitled to intrude into that vital relationship. Yet, on Friday, in my opinion, Nick Coatsworth did just that. Responding to the attack by Labor's hopeless Chris Bowen in Parliament on Craig Kelly, the Liberal backbencher who has been asking why hydroxychloroquine has been banned in some Australian states when it is common and highly effective treatment around the world for the coronavirus. Dr. Coatsworth said that all clinicians around Australia understand that, regrettably, hydroxychloroquine is not effective for COVID-19. But hang on, all clinicians? That's one hell of a sweeping statement from someone in such a position of authority, and cannot possibly be true, because there is currently a $2 million trial of hydroxychloroquine for COVID-19 underway at St Vincent's Hospital in Melbourne, paid for by your taxes. So what about those involved in the trial? By claiming that all clinicians around Australia understand that hydroxychloroquine is not effective, Dr. Coatsworth has either predetermined the outcome of the trial, which is a disgrace, or completely compromised it, which is even worse. How can those clinicians involved in the trial now be expected to be either impartial or feel confident about coming back with findings that might contradict Australia's Deputy Chief Medical Officer? What's more, how can Coatsworth possibly know what all clinicians in Australia think? Doesn't he understand the fundamental concept, so crucial not only to medicine but to medical science, of the second opinion? I have personally spoken to Australian doctors who are quite prepared to accept that hydroxychloroquine is an effective treatment in the right combination in the first few days of COVID infection, and are taking it themselves. But Dr. Coatsworth has now basically turned them and their views into pariahs on national television. Of course, Coatsworth is certainly entitled to his own personal opinion that hydroxychloroquine is or isn't effective, but he is not entitled to deny and thereby hide from the Australian public the fact that there are many, many medical professionals around the world who disagree with him, and plenty with far greater and superior qualifications than he has, as well as many other government health officials around the world who believe the drug is effective and, more importantly, saves lives. Indeed, there have been multiple studies published, some just in the last week, that claim treatment with hydroxychloroquine is associated with a very substantial reduction in the death rate amongst COVID-infected patients. Yet our Deputy Chief Medical Officer seems blithely unaware of all these studies, or he simply doesn't care. Coatsworth then went on to make this fatuous comment, which one journalist thought was hilarious. He said, "With regards to the comments made in Parliament on hydroxychloroquine, I think Australians are very clear on which Kelly should be listened to, and that is Paul Kelly." Ha, ha, ha. Get it? Paul Kelly, his boss, who's obviously sucking up to, and not Craig Kelly, the MP. So witty. Well, anyone can crack gags about people's names. If you ask me, Dr. Coatsworth's not worth his doctor's coat. If it was someone I knew who'd just been diagnosed with the coronavirus, I would want every potential life-saving avenue explored, particularly ones with a proven track record overseas, not dismissed out of hand by some jumped-up bureaucrat playing silly games with people's names. And at a time when Australian businesses are being shut down by this virus, when people's lives and livelihoods are being decimated, we need open and honest debate, and all angles need to be explored. Dr. Coatsworth's conduct is a disgrace, and the Morrison government should give him the flick today.